If you would, find Acts chapter 16, which is not really in your, if you get our notes, I'm going to tie these verses together. Find, if you would, Acts 16, and I'll begin in verse 1. Then when you find it, place your pencil there, whatever, and then turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 1, and then 2 Timothy chapter 3. So your Bibles, your devices, just take a moment and do that. So thanks to all of you for being here to encourage all these families today. It's going to be a wonderful, already has been. And aren't you grateful for our hospitality team and the red carpet treatment out there this morning, Mom? I know it's hard for you to clap now with Bibles in your hand, but I know that's what you're doing. So that was just beautiful. Absolutely. I appreciate Brother Brian and his team so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful gesture of love for you. So if you would, look at verse 1. And we talk about mothers that leave a legacy. That's a big deal. Obviously, it's a big deal for dads, but Mother's Day comes first, right? So we're talking about this legacy, and then I want to just, as I've called this series that we're in, my last series to do with you, last week, last words to graduates, this week, my last words to our moms, and then next week, my last words to my church family. So I want to stop also before I read. I don't know where Mike and Ginger Medlin got off to, but they could not be with me next week for a previous engagement, but they're here today. So help me welcome my friends Mike and Ginger and Caroline in here this morning. I'm so thankful for them. Mike has been healing up from an accident, and I'll leave the details out. So I'm just glad to see him walking. So it's good to have them with us here. So follow along as I connect these verses here with Timothy and Paul, and then his mother and his grandmother. Then he came to Derbe, that is Paul, and Lystra. And then there was a certain disciple. We know his name to be Timothy, the son of a certain, and here it is, Jewish woman who believed. But his father was Greek. That's very, very significant. He was well spoken of. Listen to his testimony. He was well spoken of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium. And so if you would, just leave that place, turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 1, and I'll read verses 3 through 5 or 6 right here. Paul thanking the church here at Ephesus, thanking those that serve the Lord, and notice how he connects all these people. I thank God whom I serve with a pure conscience. That's a big deal, as my forefathers did. As without ceasing, I remember you in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see you. Why couldn't he see him? He's in a Roman Mamertine prison. They've dropped him into a hole, a very small, confined area, and he is awaiting death. Nero would take his life soon. So in his heart, there's some things he not only wants to say to Timothy, but he knows that when he speaks them to Timothy, they'll be recorded in the pastoral epistles, which indeed what we read today, and we see the significance of his words. Greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I might be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance, how many of you thank God for a good memory of your mama? And many of you here today are celebrating her homegoing, and it's your first time without your mom on Mother's Day, and our hearts have gone out to you. I assure you, those that I knew to pray for, I contacted many of you this morning, and I'm praying for you and have been, and our church is. And notice he says here, I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. Now, if you would turn over to chapter 3 and find verses 14 through 15, and then I'll connect these and we'll have prayer. And then he says, but you must continue. And that's what this whole morning has been about, these continuing relationships. You must continue in the things which you have learned and been assured of, knowing from whom you have learned them. That's important. And that from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith, which is in Jesus Christ. May the Lord add his blessings to the teaching of his word today. You can be seated. So on this Mother's Day, just like many of you, I thank God for my mother in love. Ironically enough, this 2 days from now, May the 16th, and Friday the 19th, Sherry and I both will reflect on the passing of our moms. Sherry's mom would have been in heaven for 12 years, mine for 9. And just like many of you, we miss them every day, and the pain is real. And sometimes people say, well, time is a healer. I understand what's meant by that, but I've learned as I've grown in my relationship with the Lord and dealing with adversity, God's the healer, not time. And so time is important, obviously, but at the same time, the Lord does that. So these are my final words to you mothers as your pastor and acting pastor. And so today on this Mother's Day, as I look back over the joys of my ministerial pastoral career, to sign and pray for every Bible that was in the bag that Miss Kim and Mandy handed to me, I want you to know that as I signed that Bible, I prayed for you and your child, your children, your family, and thanked God for the opportunity that I have to play such a small part in this day. And I will forever treasure that memory through all these years. Next year when Mother's Day comes around and I'm not doing this, I'll remember, just like Paul, I'll thank God for the good memory that He's given me to celebrate and to launch your children. It's a very important time for me. Motherhood, and I don't know that anybody in their right mind would argue with this. Motherhood is the most influential role a person can have on the planet, right? You do it all. There's no sick days for you. You know that. You're always on task. You're always on call. And you're always bailing dad out first and the children out next, right? And so that's just the way it is. But it's a high and godly calling to minimize it down to the least. A mother's heart is the child's classroom. Moms teach and train every single day. As I was going over that thought this morning, here's what I thought about. And here's how I put it down in my notes. Moms shape the world from the cradle. From the very womb in which the child is born, mom is shaping the world. And she has first dibs upon launching that child out. Obviously, dad's a part of it too. But at the same time, mom is the heart of the home. Got to reflecting and thinking, and in my studies, it just bounced me back and forth to different thoughts, and I landed on a few of these things here. Mary Washington, just in her name, you probably wouldn't connect it with our first president. But her son George, here's what was said. She said, remember that God is our only sure trust in this life. To our God, I commend you, my son. Here's her parental child dedication part. Never neglect the duty of secret prayer. And then there's an image that you can see here where he's doing literally what his mom had taught him, trained him, and launched him out to do. And mom, let that picture just seize the moment for a minute. I know it's a little blurry here, but it's not up there. Think about this. The times that you will kneel and pray and thank God for your child, but then your children thinking back upon, they don't know about today. They can't comprehend all of that. But what they can comprehend is next week, next year, and the year after, and see the genuine faith that you have lived out before their life. And I promise you, there will be many sons and daughters who will kneel, not by horse, but they'll kneel literally in their home or wherever they may be to thank God for you, Mom, and the investment that you've had in their life. Abraham Lincoln, while we're in the presidential role, said, all that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my blessed mom. So it's an incredible, incredible thought. Then I got to thinking, moms are called different things. Mother, mom, if you're in England, mommy and mama. Regardless of what you call mom, she's the best, right? And so that's a term of endearment that we have. And so regardless of what term you use to call her mom, it's a special time that, or special word, I promise you they will never, ever tire of hearing. And now we get into today's text. I'm a realist, and so as I read my Bible, I read it literally. And many of you ladies here today already would say, Pastor, my mother wasn't like Eunice. My grandmother wasn't quite like Lois. I understand that. One of the reasons that I and Sherry have talked about this, but I've shared with her, and I'm only on different occasions, very limited occasions, have I shared this with you. I never knew my grandparents. I knew my mom's dad briefly because he lived with us for a little while in his latter years. But I have just very faint memories of Floyd's self. I have no memories of Louise and John. I just don't remember those personalities. But I have pictures that mean a lot to me. I have pictures of grandparents that I never knew because of just how our life tracked, and they passed before I got old enough to believe them. But those of you who have the opportunity, certainly as grandparents, to make this investment, to make this time different in their life, I challenge you and encourage you to be the best papa, granddaddy, whatever you're known by, nana, grandmother you're known by, because this biblical story is very indicative of the fact of how we should live out our lives as well. As I go through that thought, many of you may not can name a mom or a grandmother that had this impact on you. Maybe that person was a teacher. Maybe she was a social worker. Maybe she was a neighbor. Maybe she was just a friend. But all of us probably can point to someone who had a major impact in our life that has helped us get through some rough times. Timothy, though, knew the benefit of not just a mother, but a praying mother. He knew the benefit of a godly mother. I got to thinking about the pastoral epistles that Paul wrote to him, and so I just thought through some thoughts. Timothy wasn't pastor material, but his mother believed in him. She knew that he could be something that we would talk about even today. As you read the text, you'll understand in the pastoral epistle, he was prone to shyness. He was prone to loneliness. He had stomach issues. He was an introvert. He had a tendency to run from difficult tasks, which a pastor can't do. Paul constantly admonished him to stir up the gift that lied within him. And so for all these reasons, he was probably reluctant to fill the roles of what we call the pastor. But don't quickly fault Timothy. I got to thinking about that and trying to read between the lines and thinking through it from a pastor's point of view. There should always be a balance of holy fear and humility when approaching the sacred desk. There should always be a balance of zeal and passion, but yet of humility in walking in the pastor's shoes. Timothy was everything but proud, and he was everything but arrogant. He might have been shy, but he was not proud. Timothy made a great pastor at Ephesus because he was humble, and his humility was inbred into him, if you'd allow me to use that term, by his mother and by his godly grandmother. So we've read the text in Acts. Let's look and reflect on it again as a backdrop. Go back to that text, if you would, Acts 16. Paul's on his second missionary journey. He decides to check on the churches that he had established 5 years prior. He's an aged man at this point. He's in his mid-60s as well. And so he knows, it's not that he's just in a time of life when he knows his life might end, but he's in a time of life when he knows that what he's done for Jesus is going to cost him his life. The churches that he's established, the churches he's gone back at this time about 5 or 6 years prior to celebrate them and to strengthen them, we read of that in verse 1. So now with that in mind, read it again with me. Then he, Paul, came to Derbe, Lystra, and behold here's the relationship, here's how it begins. A certain disciple, and we are not left to guess who that certain disciple is Timothy. He was the son of a certain Jewish woman, Eunice, we know her to be, and who believed, and his father was a Greek. Now let's pause for a reflection on that verse. Look at it with me. The Jewish woman believed, in other words, it was a big deal, but the father was Greek. Jewish lineage always has and always will run through the mother. Timothy's grandmother and mother were Jewish. Timothy's father, as we've read, and we'll see it twice in this text, Timothy's father was Greek. And we have, at best, a strong assumption here that obviously he was not a believer. We assume that he was lost. And that's the reality for me that brings it all home to all of us today, because there are mothers that are having to do it by themselves. There are mothers in this room, always has been, always will be, that should get the Mom of the Decade Award for how they've raised their children. So this is why the Bible is so relevant. And so I'm thankful. So we can applaud all the moms today that are getting it done by themselves, that are paying the bills, working 40 plus hours a week, cooking meals, cleaning the house, keeping up with homework, and getting their children to church every Wednesday and every Sunday. So could we give it up for all those moms that are doing all of that? Because this is a day we recognize you. That's why it was important to your staff and your team to give you special attention when you walked in, and that we did. And so it was only because we want to honor you today and thank God for you. But think about it this way. We never read, never. And Dad, let me categorize, Brother Caleb will be speaking to you as fathers, but let me give a window here. It's sad that we don't read anything about Dad here. Now, it's wonderful that we read what a godly mom that Timothy had. But it's an indicting statement that you have to read and read and read, and you find no evidence that Dad had any influence in Timothy's life at all. We would say today that Timothy was from a broken home. He came from a home that he overcame, obviously, but he had to do it by lots of hard work. And here's what I personally believe. I believe that Lois led her daughter Eunice to Christ, and I believe Eunice led her son Timothy to Christ. She mentioned her son because she could not depend on her husband to do anything that she needed him to do. Why? He didn't know Christ. Now, I would speak to our students. I would speak to all of us here as adults. If you're dating again, make sure you do not go down the wrong road and join hands, hearts with a person who does not believe who Jesus Christ is. And not just because they give lip service to it, but they give foot service to it. Dad, Mom, our children should not hear us debating on what Sundays are about. They shouldn't hear us debating on what Wednesdays are about. They should not hear us debating on what VBS is about. It's a Bible education fun. It's wonderful. And so the opportunities that this church gives you, we'll have no excuse on the day of judgment except for how we didn't take advantage of them if we don't. She mentored her son because she believed that discipleship began in the home, because she could not depend again on her husband. In a Greek home, the Greek father was dominant. And the Greek father would have never, and I won't really get into the circumcision part today, but there was a reason why Paul wanted to do that. It wasn't to add to his faith or give him faith. It was to open doors for him as he would share the gospel to a world that he needed to identify with. And so Paul knew that. And so the mentoree here understood that he needed to do what his father in the faith asked him to do. Now, let's just be real. That took some guts. That took some guts. And also it was very painful. And so we see here real life being fleshed out before us in this text. Now, notice Timothy's testimony. This is the part that I really like. Verse 2, he was well spoken of. That's just a good statement. He was well spoken of by the brethren, by the body of Christ, by the community, by everybody that was in Lystra and Derbe. Now, let me go a step deeper than that. Based on what I can tell, and I have the right to be wrong, but I don't think I am, Timothy was saved at about 13 years of age. And 5 years later, we can all do math, he's 18. I don't know many 18-year-olds that are aspiring to do and to be and become what Timothy is aspiring to be and become at this time as an 18-year-old. Paul returns on his second missionary journey. He finds young Timothy about 18 years old. And it's amazing to me that this 18-year-old man is mature enough to be talking the way he's talking. But more importantly, it's incredibly encouraging to me and interesting to me that an 18-year-old is spoken so well of in his community. It says a lot for he's still a teenager. It says a lot for how he's leaned on his raising, if you would. So all the folks at Lystra and Iconium and Derbe saw how mature he was, so therefore they saw great things in his way. So here's the deal. We have Lois, we have Eunice, and we have Timothy. We have 3 generations in play here. We have 3 generations that have poured into this life, this church, this community that are being celebrated. We have that in this room today. Probably have a 4th generation. But my point is this. It's a generation upon a generation upon a generation upon a generation. It's incredibly important to know and to realize that the decisions that we are making today will affect the generation to come. And so it happened in a very positive way here for him. Look at verse 3. I'll just read it in passing. That Paul wanted to go with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. So Paul was setting him up for success, not failure. Even though it was a painful moment for him, Paul had enough wisdom to think about things that Timothy did not know about. And so this mentor and mentoree relationship is huge. And for the doors that would open for him are, of course, priceless. And here's what I believe. 2 times in these 3 verses, 2 times in this text that we've read, the Bible tells us that Timothy's father was Greek. I don't believe that Timothy's father was any longer on the scene. We don't have any reference points at all to let us believe that. He had bailed on his wife, he had bailed on his son, and it's no different than many dads today. And I'll just say in a caveat type way, it should not be that way. Dad shouldn't be bailing. Dad should be helping mom bail water. Dad should be in the mix, but we see no evidence of that at all in this situation. Now turn over, if you would, to 2 Timothy. And while you're finding chapter 1, and we'll reread the text in just a moment, he's about 65 years old. Timothy's about 35. It's an incredible picture here. He's 35 years young. He's 65 years young, and the baton is being passed. There's a tremendous amount of love on display between Paul and Timothy. An incredible amount of love, emotion, and belief in these two men. Timothy was better because of his father in the faith, Paul. Timothy could have done it on his own, but he knew in his heart, even as young as he was, that he could do it better with Paul. And Paul knew that he could make him better if he placed his faith and his trust and his belief in him. And that's what we see happening here. So in verse number 3, these are some of Paul's very last words before he's executed down the road. He says, verse 3, now, before you judge Paul for his emotions, what would you have said? I mean, man, I'm in that moment. Hopefully not dying, but just transitioning. So I've thought about that a lot. And so my heart really resonated with the text more so than ever has been before because of current events. Paul says, I thank God, whom I serve with a pure conscience, as my forefathers did, those before me, as without ceasing. And here's the deal, and I can so identify with this. I remember you in my prayers night and day. In a moment, he'll talk about his tears. I'll say more about that in a moment. So I'm going to quickly give you 3 legacies and then 3 quick application points, and we'll be on our way and celebrate this day. But give us something to think about throughout the afternoon and the week and the weeks ahead as we look back upon this day. 3 legacies that a mother should leave to her child or children or kids. Number 1, leave a legacy of transparency and tears. And that's what I meant when I said that a moment ago. Leave a legacy of transparency and a legacy of tears. Look at verse 3 and 4. I'll read verse 3 again, then I'll connect verse 4. Or just go straight to verse 4 for sake of time. Greatly desiring to see you. He wanted to see him, but he couldn't. His arrest this time was not like the first time. He was not under house arrest anymore. He's in a Roman Mamertine cistern prison. That's an absolutely horrible, horrible place. He says, being mindful of you and in my tears, of your tears, that I might be filled with joy. Now here's a seemingly long takeaway, but I want you to process it with me because I want to say something to you in this moment. Tears do not make a man less than a man. Tears simply prove that he has tenderness toward the object of his love. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that he's weak. Amy crying this morning doesn't mean that she's weak. It means that she's tender. She's singing a song thinking about her children. She didn't break to the point of the future and thinking about the importance of that. So tears doesn't define a man or a woman by being weak. It just shows that they are human and they have a softness in their heart for the object of which they're either singing or loving or talking about. But back to the men, the strong men that I remember most in my ministry are men of tears. I remember one time Zach Terry, he used to serve on staff with us here, and I was talking to him this past week, and he says, Pastor, he said, here's what I remember about you, and here's the difference between me and you. You're a better crier than I am. I said, I'm a better preacher than you are too, thank God. To which he would quickly disagree. But I was talking to him. I'll be in his church in the fall, so we were just going over some things. But I'll forever remember him saying, you've always been a better crier than me. Well, get your heart soft, Zach, that's all I'd say, right? So I love him dearly. But truth is, as a 63-year-old man, I cry more today than ever. I've cried a lot during my season of transition, but they're not tears of sorrow. They're bittersweet tears. I've used that term a lot, probably wore it out, but it's the only way I know how to say it. But rest assured that my tears have been and are being tears of compassion, love, and the many memories that we have built together in the life of this fellowship of being your shepherd. So yes, I will cry next Sunday. I promise you that. That's nothing new for you. As we celebrate our last Sunday together as pastor and congregate, we definitely will. But my tears will be tears of joy and great appreciation for the past and great anticipation for the future, because I really do believe that this church has some wonderful, wonderful days ahead of it while we all wait upon the return of our Lord. The countless lives of people that have been touched in this community and across the world is a direct reflection upon our belief in who Christ is and the difference He can make in their life. So here's another Mother's Day word. One of the great investments you make into your child's life is the softening of that child's soul. They are growing up in a very hard, cold, calloused world. So as they see you being tender, you have the ability to cause them to be tender, not hard. And certainly not indifferent. And certainly not tepid. Certainly not in the middle as so many people get as they go through life. I thought it was very interesting that secondly, leave a legacy of genuine faith. And I thought it was interesting what I'll read to you in a moment that John Calvin said. But listen to what Paul says in verse 5. When I call to remembrance, and that's the part I want you to do. Every one of us have a memory of mom, a grandmom, or the person who was significantly speaking and has significantly spoken into your life. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith, and not just faith, but genuine faith. Lots of people say they believe, but they don't genuinely believe because their actions and their steps are going in different directions than their tongue. But Paul didn't have that problem. When he thought about the genuine faith, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois, and where did she get it? From her. And then Eunice got it. And then he says, and I am persuaded is in you also. So that's what Paul is saying to him. Because he knew the lineage. He knew the legacy. He knew the generation. And he saw that. John Calvin said it this way. And it's a little hard to digest, but listen to it carefully. As you have been correctly instructed in the faith from your infancy, and having, so to speak, taken in sound teaching with your mother's milk. Translation, Eunice was so connected to Christ that the DNA inside of her flowed to her child. What an incredible analogy. Whether it's totally true or not is not the issue. We get the picture of how a mother should be so connected, not just in the womb, which they biologically are at that point, but as they have come out of that womb, how they stay connected through the years. Let me just pause for a minute and say something. Call your mama every day, because there'll come a day when you can't. Right. Call her every day. Don't get caught up in the moment when I just ain't got time, because the first day when you can't call her, you'll wish you'd made time. All these years later, I still got some of Mom's voicemails. Even Sherry's got hers. Both of us. We don't talk about it a lot because it's too painful. But at the same time, I listen, reflect upon that voice. Mom's last voicemail to me, she was in rehab, and she's been there 21 days, and I was supposed to come pick her up on that last day. Well, I told her I'd be there at 9. I wasn't. Here's the voicemail. Son, you told me to be here at 9. Well, you're late. It's painfully true. Painfully true. So I walk in, and she was in therapy. She said, don't let them kid you. That's not therapy. That's torture chamber. That's awful. And so I just remember that humor in her even as she was passing. Authenticity is a treasure for every mom to leave to her children. Being the real deal, the real mom, the real grandma, the real nana, the real papa, all those words. Being authentic in that is the big deal. And here's what I would say. We use this term about discipleship, but I want to back it up to motherhood. It is caught more than it's taught. There's not a class you take on being real. A child just sees mom and dad being real. And here's something that every mom and dad ought to remember. But again, Mom, it's your day, but I'll include all of us as dads. They probably read your godless Facebook posts. They probably read some of the traffic between you and other people. Be real careful about that, because the child doesn't need to have to correct the parent. Not that it would ever be right. But the parent should never put the child in that predicament to stop and think, why is mom, why is dad saying these kind of things publicly? So it's something that they catch that not necessarily is taught. And there's no classes to take that. It's something our kids see us do, hear us do, and watch us do each day. Then thirdly, Leave a legacy of deep convictions. Now, this is big for me. Now, if you would, turn over to chapter 3, and I want to tie in verses 14 through 15. We leave a legacy of deep-seated convictions. So while you're finding 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14, I want to read it. But as for you, continue in what you've learned and have firmly believed, knowing that from who you've learned them and how from childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, who are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. So another phrase of last words here that your pastor wants to make to every mom here. Refuse to allow the culture of this world to change your convictions. Now, come in close for one of the last times to hear your pastor. There's a difference in what you believe, or better yet, what you say you believe, and what you would say is your deep-seated conviction. For example, and I'll just give one because it's a big one. You may say that you believe in the church, but if you do not set the example as a deep-seated conviction to attend what you say you believe, there's no conviction there. Beliefs should measure and exact convictions, but many times that doesn't happen. So Mom, on your day, you already are doing a great knock it out of the park job. I just want to ask you to continue to be who you are. I want to be a better version of Tim tomorrow than I was today. And that happens when I learn how to die to myself. My devotion, and many of you track with us, we talked about how important that dying to self really is. This world has plenty of children who have sets of beliefs, but far too few of them have deep-seated convictions. They need convictions to hold them up when the bottom falls out of their life. So here's the thought. Although the words conviction and belief appear similar in meaning, there's a difference between the two words. Without convictions, you are always swayed by the beliefs of others. None of us can allow someone else's belief system to supersede what our convictions are. Now, there's also a difference between preference and conviction. You may desire a certain preference of song or music or this or that, but that's not necessarily what your convictions are. So there's a huge difference between the two. To have conviction is to feel the sheer awfulness of sin. John Owen said that. For example, you may believe that church attendance is important, but until you have convictions about the house of God, you'll never change your behavior. I've said it before and I thought about it this week. Mom always took two things to church with her Bible and her belt, and she used both of them every Sunday. I got a whooping in church all the time because my gift of aggravation, Mama didn't tolerate. And Mama just didn't do it. I want to give you 3 closing suggestions, and in 4 minutes we'll be done. Number 1. And by the way, I give suggestions today, not commands. You don't command a mama to do anything. You just give suggestions, right? Don't allow hard times to make you hard. Mom, I would strongly suggest that you chew on that one for a while. Don't allow hard times to make you hard. Be soft. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Don't let the pain that you have cause you to hate. Don't let the hurt that you have in life be spread throughout your children. And certainly, don't let any deep-seated root of bitterness steal your joy and your sweetness away. Secondly, don't allow the majority to compromise who you are. Don't give in to the peer pressure that this world faces. Take a solid stand for Jesus and pass that gene on to your children so that they can continue what you began, so that if another chapter was going to be written, one could be written about you and all of us as we read about Timothy and his mother and grandmother. Then thirdly, last but not least, don't allow this liberal culture, and dear God, do we not live in one? It's absolutely horrible what our children are seeing, what they're being taught at school. I applaud you who reinforce the Christian belief and conviction system at home when they're so stripped of that in the school systems. And so teachers today, you have such an incredible job before you. This church is filled with educators, men and women alike, people who are salt and light in the school systems. And I am thankful and grateful to have pastored a group of people who've made such a difference in the schools, in our community and our neighboring communities. And so I ask you, don't allow this liberal culture to change your convictions. Beg God to give you backbone. Beg God to give you some spunk and to stand up to people who try to tell you that what the Lord says and what the Bible says is not true. It is true. If it made the book, it's true. And it's not for us to edit that at all. It's for us as parents to make sure that we uphold it. So I end my last words to you moms this way. Happy Mother's Day. It's been a joy to serve you, to be your pastor, and to be your shepherd. So one last time, I ask you to bow your heads. Father, for the moments on this stage, this morning and then to look back, it's just incredible to know the godliness that's been brought into this world through the DNA of this church. It's just incredible. So thank you that all of us, pastor and staff and church alike, have gotten to celebrate together with so many wonderful families. And then to have the different levels of extended families that are here today. What an incredible, incredible time and point of celebration. So now as our team has found their places on the stage with me and we give this incredible time of opportunity, short but sweet, of invitation. Maybe it's your dads that just may not be quite practical just to come forward to the altar, but may every dad take the opportunity just to grab mom by the hand if they're standing together. Or if a mom's by herself today, as I know some are, for different reasons, that she just take in the moment, all the hands, the support that went up for her a moment ago, all the work that she does, the difference that she makes, and the belief system and conviction that she has, that she places in her children as they'll one day leave the home. And they'll look back and realize that mom did a great job. So let this moment be divine. Let it be godly. Let it be sweet. Let it be surreal. And then if there's any mom here today that realizes today they can't do it without you, they need to give their heart and life to you, I pray that today they will. Maybe there's children, and I don't say this to put a guilt trip on any child here today, but especially those teenagers. Maybe in this moment during this invitation, they just take a moment to go to mom, just to hold her, love her, encourage her. They may think, well, I don't want to do that, but mom will never forget it. And if not now, certainly I know they will throughout the day. So in this invitation, it's yours, just like this church is yours. And I ask you to do in it what you want to in this moment that we call divine invitation. And I'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Stand with me if you would.